In the shadows of myth and reality, monsters stir. From ancient legends to modern nightmares, we explore the creatures that haunt our stories, and sometimes, our lives. Welcome to Among Monsters podcast, where the line between man and monsters is thinner than you think.
The Grin of Death, Keith Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer. I'm Damien Vale, and tonight on Among Monsters we track the long, grim, and blood-soaked trail of a truck driver, a man whose smile was a mask, whose charm was a lure, and whose very presence radiated a chilling taste for absolute domination. He walked among us, claiming to be a good man, whispering justifications that he only killed those who deserved it. But beneath that deceptively ordinary grin, an ocean of rage seethed. A vast, echoing loneliness twisted into something predatory, and eventually a body count that sprawled across the desolate highways and forgotten byways of America. This is the chilling odyssey of Keith Hunter Jesperson, known to the world by a moniker as innocuous as it is terrifying, the Happy Face Killer. He etched his confessions in the grimy privacy of rest-stop bathrooms and scrawled them on the weathered walls of truck-stop diners, each chilling message signed with a crudely drawn, universally recognized smiley face. But there was nothing happy, nothing even remotely joyous about the unspeakable acts he committed. Not for his innocent victims, whose lives were extinguished with a casual brutality, and certainly not for the families left behind, who never saw true justice coming until the monster, in a bizarre twist of fate, revealed himself. The unseen fracture, genesis of a predator. Keith Hunter Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955, into a family that, from the outside, presented a veneer of normalcy, moving frequently between the sprawling landscapes of Canada and the United States. He was the middle child, a figure often overlooked, easily lost in the shuffle of frequent relocation. But within the walls of the Jesperson household, a different reality festered. Keith was a fundamental misfit, a square peg forced into a round hole. His father was a towering presence, domineering in his authority, yet emotionally distant. A cold, unyielding force that cast a long shadow over young Keith. Keith himself was large for his age. By the time he reached high school, his towering frame stood over 6 feet tall. This sheer physical presence, rather than conferring strength, ironically made him a perpetual target for cruel ridicule. Other children, sensing his awkwardness, his quiet withdrawal, branded him with cutting epithets. Dumb, clumsy, even outright creepy. The early seeds of social alienation were sown deep. By the tender age of 5, long before the monster fully took root, Jesperson had already begun to exhibit the classic, deeply disturbing signs that so often foreshadow future violence, chilling acts of animal cruelty. He did not merely experiment with death, he savored it. He killed birds, their tiny lives extinguished with his hands. He systematically strangled stray cats, their desperate struggles a perverse pleasure. He drowned gophers, their desperate attempts to breathe, met with cold indifference. These were not the fleeting, curious acts of childhood exploration. These were meticulous, chilling rehearsals. He would later recount with an almost clinical detachment, I would tie them up and kill them slowly. The words hang heavy, a grim prelude to the human suffering he would later inflict. The open road, a hunting ground forged in rejection. Jesperson's life, despite its outward ordinariness, was a relentless tapestry woven with threads of rejection. He harbored a quiet ambition, a desire for order and authority, dreaming of joining the revered Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But a physical injury, a twist of fate, cruelly snatched that dream from his grasp, his application summarily rejected. He married young, a desperate attempt at normalcy, building a family, fathering children. He found work, a semblance of purpose, as a long-haul truck driver, traversing the vast, lonely arteries of the North American continent. But the facade could not hold. His marriage, strained by his inner turmoil and burgeoning deviance, eventually collapsed, leaving him estranged from his own children, adrift in a sea of failed connections. The open road, a ribbon of asphalt stretching into the horizon, became his ultimate escape. It offered not just freedom from the confines of conventional life, but a terrifying anonymity, a canvas for his dark desires. Here, there was no oversight. No one kept meticulous track of his exact whereabouts. No one questioned the shadowy figures he might pick up in the dead of night. He began to frequent the desolate, liminal spaces that pepper America's highways. Truck stops bathed in the neon glow of false promise, grimy motels offering temporary oblivion, and dimly lit dive bars where hope often went to die. These were the hunting grounds, fertile soil for a predator seeking the vulnerable. Women often found alone, desperate for a ride or ensnared in the suffocating grip of addiction. That's when the killings began. The whisper of violence became a roar. The first stain, a perverse twist of fate. His first known murder, a dark genesis of his terror, occurred in January 1990. Tonja Bennett, a 23-year-old woman whose developmental disabilities made her particularly vulnerable, was living near Portland, Oregon. She crossed paths with Jesperson at a bar, a casual encounter in a fleeting moment. He offered her a ride home, a simple act of seeming kindness that concealed a sinister intent. Instead of taking her to her doorstep, he diverted his course, leading her to his house. A seemingly innocuous domestic setting transformed into a chamber of horrors. They drank, they talked, the fragile veneer of civility held for a time. But at some point, the unseen tension snapped. An argument erupted, the trigger perhaps insignificant, but enough to unleash the beast within. Jesperson, his calm facade shattering, flew into a blinding rage, striking her, his massive hands closing around her throat. He choked her until the light drained from her eyes, until the last breath escaped her lips. He would later, with a chilling attempt at self-exoneration, claim he had no intention of killing her, but that once the violence started, a dark, unstoppable current, he simply couldn't cease. He wrapped her lifeless body in a tarp, a crude shroud for his victim. Then, with the callous disregard of a man disposing of garbage, he dumped her remains in a remote, secluded area near the majestic Columbia River Gorge, a breathtaking landscape now forever stained by his brutality. And then he simply fled the scene, a phantom disappearing into the vast anonymity of the highway. Police discovered the body soon after, a grim tableau in the wild. But tragically, they did not suspect Keith Jesperson. Instead, in a bizarre and agonizing twist of fate, a woman named Laverne Pavlinac falsely confessed to the murder, implicating her boyfriend, John Sosnovsky. Pavlinac, trapped in a desperate cycle of domestic abuse, saw confession as a twisted, horrifying escape, a desperate bid for freedom from her tormentor. The two, caught in a web of lies and circumstance, were unjustly convicted and sentenced, their lives irrevocably shattered for a crime they did not commit. Jesperson watched from afar, a silent observer of the unfolding injustice, reportedly stunned by the inexplicable turn of events. Two innocent people imprisoned for his monstrous deed. And in that moment a perverse thought took root, twisting into a chilling resolve. He decided it was time to speak. The Grin's signature. Letters from the abyss. Over the next several agonizing years, a new unsettling phenomenon emerged across America. Jesperson, unseen and untroubled by his conscience, began meticulously crafting anonymous letters. These missives of terror were addressed to newspapers, to tenacious prosecutors, and to the hungry maw of the media. He scrawled them in block letters, a deliberate attempt to disguise his identity, but each message carried a chilling, unmistakable signature, a crudely drawn, universally recognized smiley face. "I killed Tonja Bennett," he boldly proclaimed in one such letter, his words a defiant challenge to the justice system. "They didn't do it. I did." But in a cruel irony, no one believed him. His claims were dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed individual, a desperate plea for attention from an unknown eccentric. The system, blinded by its own misjudgment, ignored the truth, leaving innocent lives to languish in prison. So, Keith Jesperson, driven by a perverse need to be heard, to be seen, to assert his terrible reality, killed again, and again, and again. The silence of disbelief fueled his escalating spree. He would later confess with chilling composure to murdering at least 8 women between 1990 and 1995, though some investigators, haunted by the depth of his evil, believe the true number could be significantly higher, perhaps even double that figure. His targets remained consistent: sex workers, transients, and women adrift, caught in the undertow of misfortune. People whose disappearances, as he well knew, did not ignite the furious flames of national headlines, whose lives were often considered disposable. He would pick them up at the desolate anonymity of rest stops or the fleeting companionship of bars, offering them a deceptive promise of a ride or a temporary haven. And then, in sudden, explosive fits of rage, he would extinguish their lives. The method, a chilling signature of his brutality, was almost invariably the same: strangulation. He craved the intimate, absolute control of it, the profound silence that descended as life drained away beneath his powerful hands. He claimed that once the violence began, once the dark current flowed, it released something primal, something uncontrollable within him. He once etched a chilling self-diagnosis into the annals of his confession: "Murder is an addiction. Once I started, I couldn't stop." He disposed of their bodies with callous efficiency, scattering them across the vast anonymous landscapes of America. in deep ravines, across arid deserts, and deep within remote wooded areas spanning California, Oregon, Florida, Wyoming, and Washington. He traversed state lines with a speed that defied detection, outpacing any single investigation, remaining a phantom on the nation's highways for years, a terrifying legend in the making. The fatal flaw, a predator's mistake. In '95, the seemingly untouchable monster made a fatal error, a crack in his meticulous facade. Jesperson became involved in a relationship with a woman named Julie Ann Winningham. She was different from his previous victims, not a stranger picked up in the fleeting anonymity of a truck stop. They had known each other for months. She had even met his family, a dangerous blurring of his two carefully constructed worlds. But like all things in Jesperson's deeply fractured life, the relationship began to unravel. She sought connection, perhaps commitment. He sought control, and when the tension between these opposing forces reached its inevitable suffocating peak, he killed her, strangling her with his bare hands, the same method he employed with such chilling regularity. He then dumped her body near a scenic overlook in Washington state, another life discarded in a beautiful, yet now defiled landscape. This time, however, the threads of fate began to tighten. Authorities unknowingly were already watching, drawn by a constellation of subtle clues. Jesperson, perhaps driven by a growing narcissistic need to be recognized, or perhaps burdened by the immense weight of his monstrous secrets, made a critical misstep. He wrote a confession to a friend, a final desperate cry for validation. He then made a cryptic phone call to the police, hinting at the vast expanse of his crimes. Perhaps in his twisted mind, he finally wanted to be caught, to claim his macabre fame. On March 30th, 1995, the long, grim hunt finally concluded. Keith Hunter Jesperson was arrested. In custody, the dam burst. He quickly admitted to killing Julie Ann Winningham, and then, with a torrent of suppressed horror, he unloaded everything. He confessed with unnerving detail to the murder of Tonja Bennett, clearing the names of the wrongly convicted Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnovsky, their nightmare finally ending. He then systematically listed other victims, other states, other nightmares he had unleashed across the country. Investigators were stunned. The sheer scope of his depravity, the geographic spread of his victims, the casual cruelty of his methods. It was all too much to comprehend. They had captured a serial killer whose crimes stretched like an invisible, bloody thread across the vast expanse of America. A monster who had taunted justice, signing his chilling confessions with the ironic simplicity of a smiley face. The smile's legacy, a brand of terror. During subsequent interviews, Jesperson displayed little, if any, discernible remorse. He spoke about the killings in meticulous detail, sometimes with a perverse pride in his cunning, sometimes with a frustrating impatience at the investigators' inability to grasp the full extent of his dark artistry. He brazenly claimed to be helping the police, to be educating the public about the hidden dangers on the road. But his real motive, the insidious driver behind every calculated act, was always the same: attention. He craved recognition, a perverse form of celebrity for his horrific deeds. The smiley face symbol wasn't a random doodle, a whimsical flourish. It was a calculated signature, a brand, and Jesperson savored the knowledge that the name, the Happy Face Killer, would forever be indelibly stamped onto the public consciousness. He became a chilling paradox, a serial murderer whose mask of calm and innocent iconography concealed an ocean of bottomless rage. In 1995, Jesperson pleaded guilty to the murders of Tonja Bennett and Julie Ann Winningham. He was subsequently convicted of multiple other murders, a grim testament to his prolific terror. He received multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, his reign of horror finally contained within concrete walls. He currently resides at the Oregon State Penitentiary, a living monument to human depravity. From the confines of his prison cell, the need for attention, for control over his narrative, persists. He continues to write, sending letters to journalists, meticulously curating his own macabre mythology. He has been featured in documentaries, his chilling story retold in books, his twisted saga even adapted into a Lifetime movie, all fueling his insatiable craving for notoriety. But do not mistake his openness for honesty. Jesperson remains a master manipulator. His confessions, even from behind bars, shift with the winds of his ego. Details change. He adds victims, removes them, weaving new threads into his fabricated narrative. He wants to stay relevant, even from the deepest confines of a cage. Because that is the fundamental nature of narcissistic predators. They demand that the story end on their terms, even if those terms are forged in delusion and death. The unseen victims, a societal failure. The true legacy of Keith Jesperson, however, is not simply in the body count he accrued, but in the glaring failures that allowed him to continue his rampage unchecked for so long. He operated, chillingly, in plain sight, a phantom behind the wheel of a massive truck. He benefited from the glaring jurisdictional gaps that exist between states, a lack of cohesive coordination between disparate law enforcement agencies. And, most tragically, he thrived on a societal indifference to victims who lived on the margins. Sex workers, runaways, women struggling with the crushing weight of addiction. These were not the individuals whose disappearances instantly triggered urgent press coverage or launched immediate high-profile investigations. And Jesperson, in his cold, calculating assessment of human worth, knew that. He once stated with a chilling clarity that reveals his core pathology, "I chose them because no one cared about them. But we care. We care now. We remember Tonja Bennett, Julie Ann Winningham, Angela Surprise, Lori Ann Pentland, Cynthia Lynn Rose, Suzanne Annette Thies, and the many Jane Doe victims whose names, tragically, remain unidentified, their stories untold, their final resting places unknown. Their lives were not footnotes to a killer's twisted narrative. They were people with hopes, with voices, with futures. Futures brutally stolen by a man who saw them as mere objects, disposable figures in his perverse game of domination. We speak their names with reverence and resolve, because they matter, far more than the mask, the chilling smile behind which their killer hid. Keith Jesperson's crimes remind us with a stark, unsettling clarity that evil doesn't always scream from the dark shadows of alleyways. Sometimes it wears a uniform. It drives a truck, a familiar vehicle on our nation's highways. It pays for dinner, a casual gesture of normalcy. It smiles, a disarming, comforting grin. And behind that smile, nothing but control, unbridled violence, and the cold, inevitable certainty of death. The happy face killer left more than bodies in his wake. He left questions that linger like ghosts, doubts that gnaw at the edges of certainty, holes in families that will never fully heal, wounds that bleed across generations. He left a signature designed not to amuse, but to haunt. And tonight we return that signature, not as a tribute to his depravity, but as a stark, undeniable warning. There are monsters on the road, behind the wheels of unsuspecting vehicles, hiding in plain sight, camouflaged by the mundane. And some of them are smiling. This has been Among Monsters. I'm Damien Vale. Until next time, watch for the signs, listen to your instincts, and never ever underestimate the power of a smile to hide the darkest, most terrifying truths.
Thank you for listening to Among Monsters podcast. Find more episodes of Among Monsters podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, or anywhere premium podcasts exist. Email us at amongmonsterspodcast@gmail.com.